Good morning again, Cadre 3. This is video number 4 in the series for our class in a couple of weeks. This one is entitled Silos, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And there is also a PowerPoint associated with it that you might want to take a look at. Are basically the slides I'm going to be speaking from. Again, if I can figure out how to get it embedded into the video, I'll do that. If not, it's already posted on Blackboard, so that if you want to look at it while you're also listening to this video, that'd be great. Anyway, let's get started. Silos, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, what is a silo? And you hear a lot about that, silos, when you read or talk about systems, about organizations, about the best way to design. And for the most part, silos have a very negative connotation. Well, the definition of a silo is that it's a structure. It might be underground, which probably is unfortunate from the standpoint of being a metaphor. And basically, it means to put into or to preserve. So as a mental model, silos have this vision of reality, which is different for every individual. Some see it as being very positive. In fact, if you're a farmer, a cattle feeder, those kind of things, silos are not a negative in any way, because you put stuff in there to preserve it. In fact, you put it in there to actually make it better, because in that process that's pretty close to spoiling, a fermentation process, the hay or the corn or whatever gets put in the silo, the mix actually comes out better and more nutrient rich as a feed, because it's been in a silo, either one of those tall vertical things or a bunker, which is an probably fortunate metaphor for silos as well. But that's what they're all about, and that's the good news. That's the enabling part of a silo. Things can actually get better. Because stuff's in such close contact, it's compacted and so forth. But the bad news is fermentation is just a step away from spoilage. So there are some disabling features, and we're going to focus on a few of those, but also try to make sure that we talk about the enabling dimensions of silos. Well, how do they get created, and how do silos get sustained? Because they're a fact of organizational life. They get created or sustained because of fear or a sense of wanting protection. It could be protection from intrusive rules and regulations, intrusive from publics, could be intrusion from supervisors and superiors, it could be preventing intrusion from others messing around in their work or in their arena of the task that they're doing. One of the other reasons they get created and sustained is a place of identity. And this is the positive part of silos. So if you're in one of those moods that when you think about your dream role, your dream organization, that there would be no silos, you have to remember that one of the basic purposes of silos is a place of identity. And one of the most vulnerable things, or one of the things that you can do to employees to make them the most vulnerable in the world, is to give them no place or sense of where they belong. In other words, their identity in the organization. So when you take a school district, part of my identity is the high school. Part of my identity is being a math teacher. Part of my identity is I teach freshmen, or I'm a counselor, or I'm a board member. That's my place in the world or in the organization. And there's nothing wrong with having an identity. Again, highly motivated people highly identify with not only the organization, but the particular team they're in and the work that's getting done. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Silos also create this kind of comfort zone where there's a safety. I can go to my team members in my silo or my fellow silo members, and I can talk just about anything, and I can feel protected. I can voice my concerns and so forth. And that, I think, is another potentially positive kind of thing. Well, what are some of the risks, then, that silos pose for an organization or a team? A couple. Well, there are several. We'll get a couple of them in here. Siloed organizations simply cannot act quickly to deal with a crisis or take advantage of an opportunity, because people are rigid in their silos. They don't work well with others. Sometimes communication through the silo is not even as good as it ought to be or effective as it ought to be, and communication across silos is difficult, if not impossible. A second is that it's not likely that a silo is going to be able to make productive decisions about how excuse me, about how to change in order to seize the opportunities that may come. They're not quick-acting kinds of organizations. They tend to rely on their tradition, their history, what they've done before, and repeat that over and over again. Well, there are some serious consequences to organizations from having heavy-duty, pervasive siloing kind of effect. One, silos destroy trust. There's some trust within the silo itself, but across that, other teams or other silos are very suspicious of what is going on in one silo. And there's something about silos that encourage that team to become so self-contained they can kind of do whatever they want to do. They kind of make up their own personnel rules. They make up their own rules as to how certain things should be done, and then they just keep it close to the vest so that others hopefully can't see it, but the fact is that they do. So people are suspicious. They're suspicious of how they get their work done, what work they get to do, why they were picked to do certain work, and so forth. And without trust, there simply can be no teamwork within an organization. Silos tend to cut off communication because communication is limited to the silo. I mean, I've worked with folks who are so silo-oriented that they've actually told their team members not to talk to other people, or don't talk about it in this way in this organization outside of this room. What goes on here stays here kind of mentality. Silos also foster a sense of complacency because it's so easy to focus on what's in front of you. In other words, what's inside the silo, as opposed to trying to cope with the organization across its broadest sense. And you think about a school district, how complex it is, and I'm a second grade teacher. It's hard enough for me to contemplate third grade and first grade that I'm in between, but also middle schools, high schools, the technology parts, the curriculum parts, the school improvement parts, the custodian, the bus drivers, the clerical staff, the cooks and lunchroom folks, and so forth. So it's easier just to hunker down or bunker down, in effect, because that's one of the definitions of a silo. Well, how can you recognize that silos are either part of an organization or they're in the process of being formed? Because all organizations are prone to the insidious kind of almost infection that siloing can occur, because there are people who basically feel the most comfortable in a silo. And you know, teachers who love to shut their door and have their kids, their classroom, their stuff, and really don't want to share, don't want to have anyone from outside of that domain be a part of it. Well, here's how you recognize when there are silos or when silos are forming. One, members are surprised to hear about projects taking place in other divisions or in other teams. In other words, it's a communication issue, clearly. Secondly, communication does not exist, or it's so infrequent that or it is infrequent, especially the kind that involves the leaders from across the organization. In other words, the superintendent rarely talks to the teachers, or to the custodians, or to the other classified staff, or the principal. You never see him out of his office, or the manager, or the president, or the whatever it might happen to be. Third, a large subset of the organization has little or no knowledge of something that's been underway for some time and doesn't understand why the organization is even doing this thing, so to speak. And when that's the danger part of that is that people will attribute motives to that probably don't have anything to do with what the reality of it is. Well, if you want to eliminate silos, it's very difficult to do, and I'm not sure the best thing is to go on a course of trying to do everything you can to eliminate silos. I think the key is, how do you make them work? How do you diminish their impact that's negative, and then how do you enable that part of them that is really not such a bad thing at all? Number one, I think that eliminating silos is bringing the outside in. In other words, when you do work, it's not, in an organization, you never allow work to be done in one silo. It's a teamwork kind of thing, and so the more that that work circles several silos and has representation from several silos, you have the tendency to break down some of those barriers, even though people remain in a particular silo, early childhood, special education, Title I, whatever, but at least they work together and begin to do cross-divisional or cross-team sharing. Second thing in terms of eliminating silos is focus on the opportunities that are out there, not the crisis that's there, because crises tend to reinforce the silo. They tend to actually build stronger walls because it's a defense, it's a protection, it's a safe haven kind of place. So focus on opportunities that are out there. Third, I think it's possible to create a guiding coalition that breaks down those barriers. In other words, find some key leaders in the organization that represent several different silos, ask them to lead a particular initiative, and find people who will join this team on a cross-divisional or cross-silo kind of basis. Fourth, encourage and support the idea of learning from mistakes as opportunities to improve and get better. The worst thing that organizations can do is punish people for trying and not being successful, because it creates that, again, hunker down, self-protection kind of response. And then constantly, leaders should be communicating the mission, vision, and purpose of the organization as a way of renewing what this is all about. Why are we trying to cooperate? Why are we trying to work across silos and so forth? Another strategy is to redirect the competitive spirit to an external target, not an internal one. In other words, the worst thing you can do is have teams competing against each other, because that creates a win-lose kind of thing. It's more self-protective response that you would get from the teams rather than an all-out effort to reach some kind of an external target. So competitive spirit's good, but it ought to be about some kind of external target, not an internal one. And finally, I think building trust and relationships across teams, the more you can do team building activities that involve all staff, the better off that you're going to be. Well, again, the point in summary is that silos as a metaphor, silos as a mental model are a vision of reality, and whatever that means to you is your vision of reality. The enabling part of it is, if you want stuff to kind of be preserved, if you want to have things kind of percolate a little bit, that fermentation process, if you realize, though, if it hangs around too long, it's going to spoil. There's nothing wrong with that mental model. In fact, the good news of silos is that it's a place of identity. I identify myself at Doane College as part of the graduate faculty, the education specialist program, but working across the EDL, the Master's Leadership Program, and across the new Education Doctorate, that's what teamwork's all about. In other words, we're all trying to reach this target that is external to our teams, but my identity and how I come to the table is through the Education Specialist Program. That concludes the final video. Look forward to seeing you at our April class session.